It would be an understatement to say that William Shakespeare is the face of the English language. His classic plays, such as Hamlet and King Lear, are some of the most celebrated works ever written down on paper. And while many people have mixed opinions on his other plays, he is always associated with more sophistication than most writers nowadays. However, not many people would remember that for the first half of his writing career, Shakespeare was only popular amongst the lower classes, and his first big success was a play so base, bloody, and violent that some people have argued that he didn't actually write it. Titus Andronicus was inspired by a number of revenge stories from the ancient Greek and Roman times. These tales were not only famous for their bloody acts of cruelty, but for the even crueler acts of vengeance that brought the stories full circle. Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus is a story of revenge, for someone else's revenge, for yet more revenge. Basically, the story opens with the Roman general Titus Andronicus returning to Rome after his victory over the Goths. The war has cost him 21 of his sons' lives. The surviving 4 sons come home with him, as do their prisoners of war: Aaron, the Moor, Tamara, the queen of the Goths, and her 3 sons. In revenge for his 21 sons' deaths, Titus sacrifices Tamara's eldest son. Tamara swears to exact a terrible vengeance upon Titus's family. But meanwhile, there's the question of the emperor's death, leaving his 2 sons fighting over the throne. Since Titus is so revered by the public, they demand that he settle the dispute. Although one of them is engaged to Titus's daughter Lavinia, Titus decides to stay neutral and let the eldest son, Saturninus, succeed. Saturninus, after failing to steal Lavinia from his brother, instead makes Tamara his empress. All this happens in the first act of the play, and sets the stage for a plot filled with cruelty, murder, rape, humiliation, madness, and terrible revenge. And for all this, I can't help but love its hyperbolic nature, and it remains one of my favorite Shakespearean plays. In 1999, a movie of Titus was made by Julie Taymor, who you'll probably know as the woman who made the stage version of The Lion King and Across the Universe. With Titus, she decides to make the story especially surreal, having ancient chariots and modern-day cars side by side. Tamara's sons will be in a scene playing arcade games, while in another scene, Saturninus wears a uniform similar to, say, a dictator from the 20th century. Taymor's decision to do this leaves us baffled at times, and makes for a very otherworldly look into this tale. But this doesn't detract from the story, most of which is carried over from Shakespeare's original writing. The cinematography is top-notch, working with all these strange elements of historical periods mixed together to make for some fascinating symbolism. The movie also boasts an impressive soundtrack, which in later years inferior films have decided to pay homage to. And the performances? The performances are brilliantly shot, full of hyperbole, which is really the only way you could act this play out. Anthony Hopkins is perfect in the role of Titus, a man whose immense pride leads him to slay one of his own sons when he defies his father. Yet he's enough of an emotional father to plead for the lives of 2 other sons when they are arrested for a crime they didn't commit. The character of Titus is almost as irredeemable as the villains at times, yet he is at heart a noble character whose faithful service to Rome is rewarded with treachery and sorrow. Opposite him is Jessica Lange as Tamara, who is fiercely defensive of her own children, reveling in her plots against Titus's family. She marries Saturninus early in the play, who's played with flamboyant zeal by Alan Cumming. Tamara's vicious sons, Chiron and Demetrius, are played by Matthew Rhys and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers with gleeful savagery and base desires. They in turn are motivated and mentored by Aaron, played by Harry Lennox. Aaron was one of the first truly evil characters that Shakespeare created, but was later upstaged by Iago and Richard III. But unlike those 2 vice characters that do evil for the sake of evil, Aaron is motivated by a vicious hatred of those who condemn him for his race, and in his fury decides to be just as evil as he's been branded, delighting in hurting others and encouraging others to be cruel. And Lennox pulls that off flawlessly. We also have Combeferre as Titus's much more rational brother, Marcus, who's forced to discover a scene of such infuriating tragedy that words could barely give justice to it. And while he's not especially prominent in the movie, one of my own personal favorite performances is Angus McFadden as Lucius, Titus's eldest son. Lucius probably undergoes the most change in the story, going from a bloody-minded young soldier to a rational and intelligent man, capable of leadership, and McFadden gives a memorable performance. It's well known that McFadden's understanding of his character led him to persuade the director to change one crucial part at the end of the film, and in all honesty, I'm glad Taymor listened to him. All in all, this is one of the greatest Shakespearean movies ever made. As far as I'm concerned, it's right up there with Kenneth Branagh's first 3 Shakespeare films and Roman Polanski's take on Macbeth. Titus fully embraces the horrifying amount of violence and hyperbole in the original play, 2 things that led to it being Shakespeare's first huge success. The movie doesn't hold back, showing us the horror of these violent characters, and doesn't try to add any more sympathy than Shakespeare provided. While it's probably going to leave most people completely alienated by its maelstrom of style, there's a savage energy throughout the many wonderful performances, and Shakespeare's plot transfers from stage to film successfully once again. It should be noted that the play itself was met with a lot of embarrassment from the 18th and 19th centuries, disowning it as unworthy of Shakespeare's hand. It seems fitting that only now in the 20th century and the 21st century have people begun to look at Titus again and see it for the Shakespearean masterpiece that it is.